This is China, conducting live-fire military drills in the Tibetan plains, along the border with India. This is India, looting and boosting their military presence in the area. Tensions between two-foot soldiers of two nuclear-armed regional superpower nations, India and China, have drawn international concerns over last few days. And quite frankly, as a next step this could trigger World War III, along with COVID-19 pandemic. Do you want to know why? But first, let's look into the history of these two nations in terms of border disputes. These two nuclear-armed neighbors have a long history of territorial disputes along their shared and undefined 3,448 kilometers long border. Now, here you need to know one thing. That is, there is no exact territory or border lines between India and China. From the times of British colonial rule, each side claimed vast space of territory is controlled by the other, which rooted to disagreements. Back in 1962, a war broke out between China and India. After 4 weeks of fighting, India happened to lose the war. Since then, even though both countries had aggressive border disputes time to time, there were no deadly clash between the troops for the next 45 years. So, what exactly led to this deadly slugfest? For the recent years, China had been actively working on their Chinese territory, building military infrastructure like bunkers, roads, airstrips, as well as bringing armored military trucks, tanks and artillery. And yet, India were not interested for the past few years since these borders are considered to be remote and inhospitable areas filled with mountain ridges. But having said that, in December 2019, India also started developing their border with military infrastructure and road projects, which brought China's attention. Meantime, COVID-19 pandemic came into picture. The whole world blamed and accused China for spreading the virus, but China were trolling the world and avoiding the blame. However, China is worried about India's border military infrastructure because China had lots of interests in that particular region. In addition to that, China wanted to slap down Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi over his ever closer relationship with the United States. China invaded 60 square kilometers of India in Ladakh border to construct more military bases in contested territory and to challenge India by showing off its superior military power. On the clash day, group of unarmed Indian soldiers were sent to Himalayan region of Ladakh in order to discuss and negotiate with Chinese troops to step back to where they belong, claiming that these areas were already administered by India for the past few decades. Situation got heated, resulting in serious physical confrontation between border forces on the two sides. Both Indian and Chinese troops clashed 4,267 meters above the sea level of Galwan Valley, which is referred to as the line of actual control on the disputed Himalayan border. In fact, these two sides don't carry firearms and explosives, according to the 1996 agreement, in order to avoid large-scale escalations in the disputed zones. Initially, 3 Indian soldiers had been beaten to death on the same spot with nail-studded batons, rocks, and rods covered with barbed wire. Backup teams were immediately deployed by the Indian side to the battleground. Soldiers engaged in brutal hand-to-hand fighting 4,267 meters above the sea level amid sub-zero temperatures. By the time it was over, 20 Indians were died, including a higher-ranking officer, after incurring critical injuries. 10 Indian soldiers were taken as captives. However, they were released 4 days later. Indian media reported at least 43 Chinese soldiers were killed in the violent face-off, but this was dismissed by the Chinese authorities as fake news. Though both sides seem to have avoided further escalation along the border, anti-China sentiments are on the rise in India. India's nationalist media outlets and traders are calling for a nationwide boycott against Chinese products. But critics warn that initiating a trade war or any such move will end up hurting Indian economy more, as China is the second biggest trading partner for India. With both sides blaming each other for transgressions, what could be next in India-China face-off?